what is your type? See, elemental types don't only categorize skills and actions in role-playing games, but the same elements can also affect a creature's design and identity. You can call me an artist, and I've been building an independent collection of creatures based off of STEM topics, and ever since I had an idea for a unique game mechanic, I've been coding away on Godot to possibly make a game with my creatures. Now, I believe I've settled more or less on what types I do want for my game, but before I talk about my less conventional additions and another line of stemma designs, let's talk about how other games in this creature collecting genre added their types, starting with Pokemon. So by the time Pokemon was being developed, there were other series of RPGs with their own bestiaries. These creatures would be often taxonomically categorized by their race or family, and sometimes this classification would matter in the gameplay, as some moves are specifically effective against certain categories of monsters. Remember that context, as this is a mechanic Pokemon tried to copy in two ways, through Pokemon categories and elemental types. So firstly, yeah, Pokemon has something straight up called categories, which might have grouped evolutionary families together, but they actually didn't. These were previously called species, as they translated the design into terms one can understand outside of this universe, but sometimes Pokemon of different evolutionary lines would share the same species name. This tradition of having Pokemon categories would continue to this day, but so many new Pokemon try to have their own distinct category that they really do feel like species names. These categories don't really have a function in the game other than providing additional flavor text, but Pokemon would also implement this category mechanic into their elemental system, as elements describe not just the moves but also the creatures of this game. We've seen this before where certain themed enemies would have themed attacks, but as Pokemon was a creature collector, that enemy can now be in your party to wield those same elemental powers, while this very same elemental system can now be used to describe this monster's weaknesses and resistances. While you got the common elements like nature, fire, water, and the sorts, Pokemon tried to turn a few taxonomical categories into elements. One big piece of evidence is with the unused bird type, which could be found in the code of the first two generation games. But this bird type is only accessible through glitches. The existence of this bird type shows how an elemental type was considered to be made from a category of the creature's biology. And even if you're not convinced due to how this bird type was scrapped, look at some of the types that did make it in the games. Bug, dragon, and even the ghost type are all types that describe the species' biology rather than the more traditional definition of an element. Technically, grass type does this too, with most grass types being plants and fungi, but nature's greens have been a culturally recognized element before. But yeah, this is how Pokemon started out with 15 types, by having a few taxonomical categories thrown into the classical elements and other common themes of attacks like magic or muscular force. Oh yeah, I should mention this rock ground split, shouldn't I? While I went more in depth on this topic before, this rock ground split is pretty unique to Pokemon, and it seems like this was their solution to having certain earthen moves not touch flying types. Nowadays, Pokemon would probably have a separate category of these grounded moves so that the type is immune to just those kind of moves. But Pokemon would justify this rather unintuitive split by making their types operate very differently. Speaking of game mechanics, Pokemon would eventually add 3 new types to these 15, where the Dark and Fairy type especially felt like direct answers to counter the strongest type of the game, as these new types were immune to said type and were super effective against them. The Steel type could also be considered to counter the Psychic type, but it kind of resists everyone. Also, metal is a recognized element in several cultures, so steel isn't that far-fetched of an element. Now, when Pokemon added Dark and Steel in the second generation, only the Magnemite line got retconned to now be Electric Steel type. But when the Fairy type was introduced way later in the 6th generation, many past Pokemon were retyped to now include the Fairy type. Because even if you add in a bunch of Fairy designs, the existence of hundreds of past Pokemon would make those inclusions feel less natural. But yeah, this is how Pokemon ended up with 18 types. However, there were a few additional types that also appeared in this franchise. The typeless question mark type is a neutral type that was recognized until the 5th generation. As rare as it is possible to achieve this typeless state, especially with moves that remove a type from your Pokemon. Everything deals neutral damage here, and while Curse used to be the only move with this question mark type, it has since been redubbed as a ghost type move. So now there are no typeless moves, but you could theoretically still make your Pokemon have no types. Now, we see the opposite with the Shadow type in the Colosseum spin-off games, where there's no Shadow type Pokemon, but there are Shadow typed moves with their unique interactions. I'm telling you, I would have loved to see more Shadow Pokemon with different forms, but the only canon ones are Shadow Lugia and later Shadow Mewtwo in Pokken. But even in those cases, the shadow phenomena were more of a condition that's applied on top of the Pokemon's regular type, rather than making shadow Pokemon have a unique type interaction, other than resisting shadow moves. Now lastly, there's the 9th generation of the main series, Scarlet and Violet. The main gimmick of this generation allowed you to change your Pokemon's type through a mechanic called Terastalization. And the Indigo Disc DLC centered around this one Pokemon, Terapagos, who was supposed to represent the 18 types of Pokemon. This guy's gonna be hard to explain if Pokemon ever decides to add even more types in the future. But anyways, Terapagos came with the new Ultimate Stellar type, a special type that's only accessible through Terastalization. Now the Stellar type has many similarities with how the Shadow type was implemented, because the Stellar type Pokemon still has the same weaknesses and resistances as the Pokemon's regular typing. That's right, while Stellar type is called the 19th type, it's really more like a special condition that just boosts every new type of move that Pokemon uses. There are Stellar type moves, and they deal neutral damage to everyone, regardless of their typing, but they are super effective against other terrestrialized Pokemon. I mean, I personally wish that this 19th type was actually more of a type rather than a special condition, as the Stellar type is a purely offensive option for this generation's gimmick. But this is what Pokemon had decided to do with their ultimate type. That kinda goes over how Pokemon added new types, but how did other games of the genre add their own types? An easy way for a game to distinguish themselves is to use different themes, like different elemental types. And there have been several new creature collectors just in the past decade. So are there themes that we haven't seen yet in these other games? Such types in Temtem would include the Digital and Crystal type, where the former's creatures are largely artificial and the latter takes a more mystical approach on the earthen element, as they also have a separate Earth type. Cassette Beasts goes even further. Not only do their type matchups give specific buffs and debuffs on top of their effectiveness, but they also have types like Astral, Plastic, and Glass. Not to mention a special condition-like type called Glitter, where no beast is naturally Glitter type, yet a Glitter type move would turn one's type into Glitter. Now, Cassette Beast also has a Beast type, which might be another case of using a taxonomical category as an elemental power. But what if you are trying to create a roster of creatures of your own? At the end of the day, it is most important to recognize your own goals. If you're only focusing on making a roster of designs, which is a really cool undertaking in of itself, you might think about what themes could yield fun designs for you. And this reason is usually the strongest one. See, Pokemon was in a unique situation where they had a pre-established world that they tried to add and retcon, making them consider what was strong in the game and how the new type can be evenly distributed amongst past designs. More often than not, you don't have to worry about that. Just remember how types can come from culture, past games, taxonomy, and even your own project story. It all depends on your goal. And my goal with my Stemma project is to make STEM-based phenomena from our own world into a more approachable and interactive experience. Stemma is my collection of creatures that are based off of STEM-related topics. I say this in nearly every video, as my videos are usually coming from a perspective of not just the designer of the creatures, but also someone who wants to develop a game with said creatures. If you see my stemmas, they are categorized by elements because throughout the creation of this project, I never wanted to divide these topics by their fields. Not only does it not make sense to say that one field beats out another, but I believe the division of fields is wholly detrimental in the description of reality and the pursuit of knowledge. This is why I was against having a type based off of space, as it would narrow the type to mostly just astronomy. And it's why I'm trying my best to spread other fields in different elemental types. See, I keep on repeating that my creatures are based off of STEM topics, not the media view of a scientist who is reduced to a lab coat donning Einstein-haired freak surrounded by bubbling bongs. No, STEM is more than just organic chemistry. It's the chair you're sitting in, your heart pumping a beat, and your phone's screen showing you this video. It's all these mechanics and phenomena that make our world tick. Alright, so thematically, I find the classical elements to be a very fun classification. The cold and electricity also offer distinct themes. Now, dendro or wood is a classical element in Eastern societies, but it's the type I'm most keen on revisiting in the future, as while I love the RGB color scheme it provides, I do wish to broaden it to represent tree shapes and various patterns life has taken, rather than being exclusively botany. Now, I spent my previous video going over how I'm satisfied with the body, mind, spirit categorization of 5 of my types, especially with Forta and Toxa, representing the physical and chemical change split, but with my null type, I still got 2 more types that I haven't talked about yet. On top of the classical elements in Central and Western societies, there was Aether, that often represented celestial bodies. I already mentioned how I thought a space type would be too restricting for me, but the element could be like an ultimate kind of a type. Still, at this stage in my project, I am largely against having such a distinction, maybe in the future, but not now. So we can turn to the Eastern societies again, where the 5th element was metal, with a Metalla type. While all the other elements could be paired up pretty nicely, I felt like Metalla needed a partner. What is an element that is the opposite of metals? Well, that's where I pulled out the periodic table of elements, where we can generally call the elements on the left to be metals, and the right elements are non-metals. Ooh, is there a better term for these guys? No. But I kept thinking on the slide, if Metalla stemma are utilizing refined metallic material, what if there were stemma that were particularly good at wielding non-metals? I mean, nearly every living organism uses non-metals, as many of them are the fundamentals of biomolecules, but a lot of life use metals as well, just not as much. I'm talking about stemma whose identities are tied with non-metallic materials, with many of their skills involving synthesizing polymers. So, I could call them the Polymera type. Alright, that's the name and vibe I'm going for, like large biomolecules but also special materials that are gooey and plastic instead of being metallic. I really wanted to call this the Syntha type, but synthetic has this connotation of being artificial, and I don't want these guys to be strictly artificial, like a stemma based off of natural rubber would have this type. I'll probably chew on the name some more, but the theme would stay mostly the same. Additionally, my fat cell adipodal would be a chroma polymera type now. I also changed their design to celebrate their reclassification. All my types interactions would need to be playtested in the future, so I shouldn't say anything about the type chart yet, but I could talk about another stemma design that would also have this polymera type. What do you picture when I say robot? Well, robots can actually wildly differ in their appearances. Their designs really depend on what goals one wants to achieve. Thus, there are several fields and subfields of robotics. Like today's stemma's design is based off of soft robotics. What if you don't want your hard metallic robot to break something delicate? What if you don't want your robot to break when entering a narrow winding path? The use of flexible material like sponges and silicone can help a robot achieve these specific tasks. Many of these soft robots take notes from animals and other biological examples, as fluids like air can be used to alter the shape to make the robot grab eggs, fit through arteries, and even walk. Like Gripter here, who's like a walking hand. They'll walk all over the place, but they'll never leave a trace. I won't be sharing my attributes in the meantime, as the effects will most likely change, but yeah, Gripter is a Polymera Forta stemma, as this hand will turn into an arm with fan hold. Like how soft robots can mimic tentacles, this guy would be able to constrict your opponents to prevent them from leaving. Yeah, as much as I want to keep my roster a secret until I complete my whole game, firstly, it's gonna take a long time until I fully complete my game, and secondly, I feel like I need to leave proof that I've been working on this for a long time. Like, even this line was made several years ago. Types are fun. Not only do they provide a set of themes, but they also create categories of creatures. It's most important to assess your own goals, as themes can be pretty flexible to mean whatever they're supposed to do mechanically. Most of my videos on this channel will continue to share my perspective on specific game tropes as I'm trying to make one myself. So if you find this conversation interesting, subscribe to the channel! I want to especially thank my Patreon patrons for the direct support of my project, but you can support me for free by just liking and sharing this video. Alright, thank you for watching till the end, and I hope you all have a nice one. Till next time.